Just a bit of a disclaimer. I know having slides is a little lectury, but this is the way that we sort of have organised our thoughts for this. And there's also some projects we've worked on that relate to material you see here, but it was easier to display digitally, including some projects that aren't finished yet. So we will be referencing the slides a bit. I'll introduce myself first and some of my connections to the archive before I hand over to Zenobia. A little background. So we're both publication designers and educators. So we're both working in publication design. So at the turn of the millennium, I made a big jump and moved from Melbourne to London to pursue the goal of working as a magazine designer. With determination and far too much time spent sleeping on friends' floors, I ended up working as a designer for many types of publishing houses and on a wide range of publications. These are some of them, including the sadly defunct graphic design magazine called Graphic, which I wrote for and ended up as their last designer for that publication. And I made sure before the magazine closed that I grabbed everything I could of artwork files. So I have an archive of the entire publication on a hard drive, just sitting there, waiting to be reawoken. So I returned to Melbourne over a decade later, and I worked for Architectural Review Asia Pacific and Inside Interior Design Review. And it's where I met the publishers at Euro Publications, who are a Melbourne-based publishing house that specialise in architecture and design titles. This image is of some covers I kind of made for fun for the editor, just imagining what the titles might have looked like if they were produced in the 50s under the editorship of M.J. Richards, who was a famous editor for Architectural Review in the UK. So the first book I completed for Euro was this one in 2014. It was a traditionally cloth-bound book. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy to show you. But we wrapped it in Tyvek, which is a material used in construction to sort of weatherproof unfinished buildings. So the paper on the cover is this sort of crunchy, untearable, weird sort of material. That really kept folds, unfortunately. So if you creased it at all, the crease stayed. But there was kind of an interesting effect, but surprising, I guess. Since then, I've produced many projects for Euro. It roughly evens out to 1 or 2 a year. And this is alongside other designers on their roster that you may have heard of, including Stuart Geddes, Fabio Ungarato, and Sean Hogan. I'm currently working on 3 very different titles for them right now. It's probably what I should be doing. They're all on deadline. And we're hoping to release all 3 of them by the end of the year. I'm going to introduce you to a couple of projects, one that's completed and one that's still being completed. So the one that's completed is on the table in front of us with the very colourful stripy cover. I'm just thinking it probably actually, that pattern is from the same era of a lot of the materials on the table. So there's probably some sort of connections in terms of design and colour and motif that can be made, especially with some of these stiletto magazines and crowd magazines. I'll explain a bit about that pattern. So the book itself was initiated shortly after the passing of the architect and educator Peter Corrigan, whose building designs and influence was inescapable in Melbourne in the 1980s onwards. Buildings he designed for RMIT are actually visible from the front door of this building. So if you look across to the main RMIT campus, you'll see quite a lot of his architecture. And an event was held to allow many practitioners and friends familiar with Corrigan to pay tribute to him through a series of presentations. So he also did a lot of teachings. There was a lot of slide presentations as tribute to him on his passing. And the book is a tangible record of those presentations. and a further tribute. And I made a note here just that archives contain books, but books are also archives too. This archive's an event. Without this book, there would be fragmented records of this tribute event to Corrigan. Yeah, so back on the book, growing up in Melbourne, Corrigan's work was present throughout my own childhood, because I grew up in the 80s when he was making a lot of sort of public-facing buildings. And I wanted the design of the publication to be a tribute also from the designer. So to this end, many of the contributors had referenced material from this archive. So RMIT Design Archive has a lot of material, drawings, etc. relating to Peter Corrigan, and a lot of the presentations reference this material. So I also sifted through the material from the presentations to source sort of ideas for the book. And one of the key things I settled on was these drawings of, in RMIT Building 8, there's all these pillars with sort of mosaics and tiles on them. And we had, like RMIT Archive had those drawings and had supplied them for the book. So they became like a feature inside the spine that denoted the different articles. Can you just reach over and grab that for me? Thanks. It's probably easier if I show. So inside the spine of all these books, of each article, is a different pillar tile design. And this continued through the book. And there were so many different tile patterns that there was pretty much one for each presentation. Thank you. And also the wrap around the front cover is the tiles when you first enter Building 8, as it is now, I think. This was a really nice thing that happened that I was kind of hoping would, but is another sort of happy accident. The column artwork then provided a sort of informal visual index to the different articles if you looked at the top or bottom of the book. And something I really like to do is consider the profile of a publication and think about process, like what's going to happen to the edges of the pages is really interesting. And it's kind of like an Easter egg. It's like a hidden feature that you can incorporate into a design of a book. When working on architectural titles, it's hard not to see books as constructions, similar to the buildings they talk about. This is just a theory in my head, but I'd love to talk to some architects about this one day, whether a book can be like a building. Because like the approach, particularly with this book I took, was like constructing it out of materials and working out how this material is going to work together. It was a build, you know. This is a rejected version of the book where the text and the images were separated out but kept as companions through the structure of the book. I'll go to the next title. So this is one that doesn't exist physically yet. It's still digital files, but this is one we're hoping to print ASAP. This book is called Grounds, Romberg and Boyd, the names of three architects that made quite a prominent mark on Melbourne. And inside, if we go to the next slide, so there are architectural drawings, as you would expect, but also a host of other archival material from a broad range of sources. The bulk of the material was initially sourced by the editor, Maria Larkins. Much of it was from this archive. So there's a lot of material drawings, but also lots of other sorts of types of material. And it wasn't just this archive, there's a whole heap of sort of sources that she was referencing, but I know she spent a lot of time in this particular archive. It's sort of, this pushed myself and the publisher to source even more sort of material. So we decided that we would push the sort of storytelling aspect of the book and not just reproduce nice images of buildings. We would also sort of dig through archives and find all sorts of crazy material. This is zooming in on the page plan. So this is actually a working file for me. This is how I see all the pages laid out, and I sort of work out what goes where and how pages are relating to each other. Oh, I'll tell you some of the things we included. So there were handwritten instructions and notes. There were hand-drafted architectural plans, which, you know, look very drawn compared to architectural plans you would see today, often with sort of little notes and scribbles and folds and creases and weird sort of marks on them, which we kept. We kept as much of that as possible. There were cartoons, and where there were sort of cartoons from papers, we sourced the original drawings rather than reproducing the actual newspaper. Having said that, we also sourced a lot of newspaper articles. And these were mostly from Trove rather than any other sort of archive. But we kind of went crazy for all these different types of formats and trying to find different ways to express the story of the book. And it's very much there's storytelling in this book, so that made sense. And I think, yeah, so this is the last slide that I can kind of show you of this. I'm particularly fond of the handwritten letters and telegrams that we sprinkled throughout, which further support the storytelling nature of the text, which comes as a nice surprise if anyone's expecting a clinical recording of past projects surrounding this reasonably short-lived collective practice. And I'll just mention that this book, again, is called Grounds, Romberg and Boyd, and hopefully, being well and good, it will be out later in the year. And I'm really excited to see how this turns out. I'm kind of wondering how a lot of this material is going to actually print, especially since we're running with just 2 colours throughout. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see this all together. But I'm going to hand over to Zenobia, and she's going to tell you a bit more about her practice.
Hello, I'm Zenobia Ahmed. I teach with Michael at RMIT. I'm going to talk a little bit about my practice, just to get an understanding of where we were coming from when we looked at some of the archives for our students earlier this year. A big part of my practice is designing publications by myself, also in collaboration with other designers and friends, in addition to collaborating with writers, editors, publishers, and printers. I'm also very much interested in production side of publishing, so printing, and also coding if it's something digital. I'm the resident designer at Discipline at the moment. It's an arts publisher here in Narm. I've got some books from them over here, but I'll talk through some of these. So the series that I want to talk through is called Discipline Papers. Just next slide. My partner Dennis and I design a few of them, and we also print these by ourselves. There are 5 in this series so far, another 3 in works. I'm happy for you guys to have a look at these or even pass them around. The format is A3 folded in half, lengthwise, and printed on a risograph. So while thinking of format for the series, there were a few things I really wanted to try as a designer, but I was also expanding into printing at the time. So one big thing was being able to print these by myself. It can be really stressful as a book designer when you send files out for printing, because sometimes you never know what's going to come back. Printers sometimes even change the paper stock without telling you, and it is very stressful. So the Discipline Papers, they are exegesis from Monash fine art students. They were printed at my studio up in Coburg, and some of these were also reprinted at Monash University and some here at RMIT. Has anyone heard of risograph printing over here? Cool. Yes. Yes, very interesting form of printing. You can do 1 or 2 colors at a time, very economical, and really, really fast printing. So that was one of the works. The other work that I'm going to talk about is the Disorganizing Workbook. This was done a few years ago, a collaboration with a dear friend of mine, Alex Margetic. for liquid architecture, wet space, and bus projects. One aspect of this project that I particularly enjoyed was the variety of formats in which we published. So we covered both physical and digital side of publishing, but also looked at large format publishing, which might be very similar to some of Stuart's work over here. The image over here is of the disorganizing workbook. The project was done a few years ago, so I'm going to read out a few things I wrote at that time. The workbook encapsulates thoughts and ideas from the disorganizing project, the disorganizing team. I can see Hang over here today. Thank you for coming. Hang was the editor of our project. So we basically had meetings with the whole team, and sort of they contributed to the concept of what disorganizing could look like in design. So a big part of it was how we use typography and how we typeset the publication. Typefaces for the books and the project were sourced from local type designers in Melbourne, namely Vincent Chan and Dennis Grohl. The outcome was this really non-structured, messy system where each contribution was designed differently. We had wandering grids and margins. Our page furnitures moved around, so we didn't have paginations on the same pages, and a really disobedient typography. The book is section sewn and has an exposed spine. You can see it here. This was printed at Print Graphics here in Melbourne, but there were parts of the book which were also printed in Sydney, like the section over here, which traveled to Melbourne and then got bound at Marvel Books. The workbook was printed in 2 colors just because of budget. Every book has got a budget, and you have to meet that. On an offset press, section, like I said before, was printed digitally in CMYK colors. There were also a few inserts in the book, like the one here. These were printed by Alex and me on a risograph, and the other insert was printed on a laser printer. So a lot of different printing techniques went into this book. There are also some ephemeras that were designed for the book. These were all printed on the risograph again. The project also looked at publishing in non-traditional formats, and that is something I'm very much interested in, imagining how we can publish, but it's not in a form of a magazine or a book. And something in the RMIT Design Archive is like, something that's here is like the fast-forward cassette magazines, which is over here. Very interesting piece of work. The cassette actually has some music and also interviews, and it also comes along with, I would say, I don't know how to describe it, but lots of ephemera within the magazines, bits and pieces of papers, usually printed in 1 or 2 colors. It's got interviews, some text, and it's also got, I think, crossword. It's a big part of magazines in them. Okay, coming back to that. During the project, we also looked at publishing in non-traditional formats. We did a series of posters which was stuck around Collingwood Yards. Unfortunately, we didn't get a really good picture. This was during lockdown, so that is all we could get. But it was, this was a manifesto written by Shannon Goodman about what disorganizing means to them.
So that's us, but we didn't want to focus on our work necessarily today. So we sort of split our presentation a bit. But rather we want to talk about the studio that Anne mentioned earlier, which was called Thinking Through Making Known, which was a hasty sort of title we came up with, but I think it was appropriate. So this studio actually led to the amazing spread of material you see before us, being sort of put together very kindly by Simone Rule and the team here. And the focus of our studio would be publishing, but not as you might think of it. Some students arrived with the aim of further developing their book design skills, which there was room for. But we were also interested in investigating publishing formats away from books, and how this might link to design and archival practice. As a quick breakdown of how we tackled this, so we decided on a format of 3 assignments that would be undertaken over 12 weeks. There would be a set task each week, inviting students to make a publishable object based on what was happening in each session. We also want to take students off-site, away from classroom settings. So the first 3 weeks we visited 3 different sites or archives that held publishable material. This was our first stop. So we wandered across from RMIT to here. And we also visited the Women's Art Register, which is based at Richmond Library, which we recommend visiting. And the Melbourne Art Library, which is on testing grounds, or in testing grounds near Victoria Market, which I also recommend visiting. Each week, 1 publishable object was produced, accumulating in a 12-piece portfolio. For their visit to RMIT Design Archive, they were asked to take as many photos as they could. And this was partly because we didn't know whether they could actually be able to touch the objects or not if we were just looking at them. So we kind of set the brief to just come here, take as many photos as you can. And then they were to assemble a messy research poster based on the theme, or loosely based on the theme of process. And here are some of the results.
So I think a lot of our students were drawn to works by Carol Wilson, Jill posters, which you can see up here. On the screen, we've got a poster by Bruno. It contains some images that stood out to them, along with some notes on silk screen printing, and something that Bruno wrote about at the back of the poster was how interested they were in the illegal pay stops that were happening through Carol's work. This next set of images is by Michaela. Being quick and messy can be quite challenging for designers, and this is quite a neat poster. Although we did not give them a lot of time, it was like a quick 20-minute, but then we really did get a range of different ways the posters were designed. This one's really well and nicely designed. This one also captures the work of Carol Wilson. Liam over here was interested at looking at typography, and this is a really good example of quick and intuitive approach that provided an overview of typefaces and typography from the particular era that we were looking at. This was just before design and production went fully digital. Liam was tempted to obviously further refine his poster, but we were like, this is what you've done is amazing work. And I think Liam was one of very few students who really zoomed into the different design elements found on magazine covers. Alia over here took a very highly analytical approach. They extracted various details from Ian Robertson's work titled Xmas Dinner 1981. They sort of expanded upon and highlighted production techniques utilized at that time. So they also had notes on silk screen printing. And if you go back, another interesting thing that they write about is the type on the corner which says red, and how that was made by just using rice, and they sort of scan that.
And this is students too who used to digital production. Like this is the introduction to sort of print-based production for a lot of the students. And they were sort of noting things down without really knowing what they meant.
The next one is Rochelle's poster. This gives a good impression of how images were treated around at the time. So mostly utilizing limited color palette that emphasized the visual aesthetics of pop culture or style magazines, which was mostly duotone treatment for the images.
So as well as weekly tasks, there were 3 core assignments to complete. The first assignment would come out of the 3 archive visits and would aim to answer the question, what would you give back to the archive? we'll share a couple of projects here. These were quite involved, some of these projects. This one that we'll show you first is really quite detailed. So this is by a student called Weiying Zhang, aka Sophie, who created a multi-format response that melded original editorial content with audio recordings and printed matter, drawing direct reference from the material you see here, but also linking it to her own personal experience of underground media in China. She did a wonderful piece of audio that's sort of like a podcast with music from the era in the background. If she ever publishes it, it would be fantastic. It's too long for us to play right now, but it was a really wonderful piece of work. She named the project A Tale of Two Cities, from Zhang to Melbourne. I've probably mangled that pronunciation, apologies. Inspired by Fast Forward in particular, which is the magazine with the cassette attached that's on the table here. And its combining of text and audio. Sophie researched and wrote a script telling the true story of recent threats to the live music scene in Melbourne. And as I said, contrasted this with her own experience of the repression of the alternative music scene in China a few decades earlier. And to this, she also included a sort of wide selection, some of which she brought into our sessions, of Chinese underground magazines that were from her personal collection, which was amazing to see. Like, that would be an amazing exhibition, actually. The other thing she did was she recorded the text from the book as audio, and then she located and ordered a portable vinyl recording machine from China online. And she made the booklet in this square shape so she could make a flexi disc of the audio to put inside, which didn't work. It wasn't perfect, but amazing to just even think to order this machine and try and etch this recording onto a booklet. So this was an amazing project. I'll pass this to you to talk about Gabby's work.
Gabby decided to make a comprehensive analysis of stiletto magazines that you can see here. So as part of her research process, she went through her family albums to find images from the same era as the titles, which then she treated in ways mentioned in her analysis. I think she was looking at the images and the treatment of images. The image that she proposed, which is on the cover, is the image of a mother in the late 80s. And she redesigned the cover. This was quite an interesting outcome. So it sort of combined the personal and the analytical and all the works that we sort of looked at in the archive.
Part of her documentation, which was extensive too, included her sitting on the floor going through boxes of photos, which was really nice to see. So this is the last sort of thing we'll talk about. In preparation for students' final reflective assignments and to encourage them to think outside of traditional publishing, we set a short task and asked for a list of things that were not books. And this is some of the things students came up with. I'm passing back to you.
So the first image shows the work of Nellie Hanna, who decided to publish 12 T-shirts. The prints were a mix of text and images on the T-shirt. I think, what was the process of printing?
She used a heat transfer, but she knew someone who had like a T-shirt printing studio, so she was like churning out these transfer prints, but one color, so they look like screen prints.
Yeah, yep. The second one, the middle image, is clocks done by Alia. So they were typographic explorations, and she sort of responded to the publishing that we did each week with a clock face. And again, like she sort of pulled through words, images, colors, depending on how she was feeling that week, onto the clocks. The last work is some fortune cookies, which contains truisms by Elisa Chen. So Elisa actually started making the cookies a night before. our presentations. I don't think we can archive cookies.
She wanted to make sure they were tasty too.
Yes, she went through 2 different batches.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was quite a process, really performative in the way she explained to us what was in the cookies. Again, there were truisms by Jenny Holzer, and I think Elisa added a really beautiful format of publishing, adding on to a long list of Jenny's different formats.
Yeah.
Yep.
We saw the ingredients, we saw the baking of the cookies, we saw the everything. So that's a very brief summary of a very hectic studio that we put together, which students kept up with, which was amazing for a start. They saw several archives, they interviewed several people involved in publishing, and they managed to produce these amazing multimedia publications by the end of it. We also, as part of the assignment, they had to reflect on their experiences, and there were so many really warm, positive comments about the Design Archive in particular. I'll read a couple out. I won't read too many because they're a bit sort of like, reviews or something. So one of our students, Priscilla, said, "The visit to the archive has certainly shown me the importance of using art and design as a means for social change," which I think is really clearly evident in particularly the poster works that are on display here. And she said these archives like this serve as powerful calls to action, urging us to confront and address issues in society, which is a really good takeaway, particularly from the activist works. Holly said, "This experience highlighted my awareness of the diverse avenues through which design can communicate." And this is, I think she's reflecting on process in particular. "My journey through the archives was a captivating exploration of the boundless creativity and ingenuity inherent in design across various mediums and eras." So yeah, we took that as, well, we did our job in terms of like broadening the scope of what is considered publishing. And that's also why we wanted to present this again to you all, especially in the context of rare books. Because there's so many archives with a wealth of material around, and it's not necessarily books, but it's just as valuable and it's just as easily described as publishing. Yeah, so thank you. I think that's it.